Do the New York Knicks have a top 5 front office in the NBA? I'm joined by CBS Sports Sam Quinn to debate.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to the New York Knicks. My name is Gavin Shaw. I'm a native New Yorker. I'm a credentialed media member that's been covering the Knicks for nearly a decade, and I'm the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. This is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving the most detailed insight on your favorite team at least 5 days a week. So be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing in both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. On today's show, I am lucky enough to be joined by Sam Quinn of CBS Sports, guy I've had a relationship with on Twitter for a long time. I've never gotten to talk to before, and it was a pleasure. He's a brilliant basketball mind and a really nice guy. We talked through his really excellent article that I'll link in the episode description. Encourage you guys to check out, ranking every front office in the NBA. We talk about the two teams that I took issue with being ahead of the New York Knicks, the brilliance of the Jalen Brunson signing and why that was a defining move for Leon Rose, and why Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns are ultimately going to be the ones that determine whether or not Leon Rose goes down as an all-time great GM, and this goes down as an all-time great front office for the New York Knicks. But before we get into all that, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. All right, guys, as promised, I am lucky enough to be joined by Sam Quinn, an NBA reporter for CBS Sports, someone I've followed online for a long time, meeting him in person for the first time today. Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be on. I'm a New Yorker. All my friends are New Yorkers. So whenever I do a Knicks podcast, they get a string of text. So looking forward to this.
Oh, beautiful. That's great to hear. Hopefully we can have you on more regularly then. So we're doing this based on like a February Twitter debate we were having where you put out, and by the way, I feel like not enough people write these articles, and it's such a fascinating topic to me. You ranked all 30 front offices in the NBA. If I'm remembering correctly, the main thing I took issue with was you had the Utah Jazz ahead of the New York Knicks, and we were talking it through, and you're like, hey, why don't we just do this on a podcast? It's a lot easier, which I always agree with. You can't, it's so hard to fully get your point across on Twitter. Since then, you put out an updated list in July, where you had the Knicks ahead of the Jazz this time around. So my main cross to bear, it has already been settled, but I am interested to discuss it with you. Like, first, we could just start very broadly. Like, you make the point in the article that front offices are just better than they ever have been. And you were really clear to point out, and I appreciated this, that like the ones ranked 16 through 21, and to be clear, the Knicks were a lot higher than that, are not bad front offices. Like, could you just speak to that a little bit? The idea that there aren't really, I mean, maybe there are a couple, but there aren't like the slew of patsies around the NBA that used to be that the smartest teams could just kind of take advantage of.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because I think we did go through a period where, I think you go back 20, 25 years, there were like 7, 8, 9 really dumb teams. I think back to the Bill Simmons atrocious GM summit where like there were even guys who didn't make that who probably deserved to. Then we went through a period, maybe the last decade or so, where no, you only really had like 1 or 2 consistently dumb teams. Sacramento always was, just by virtue of their ownership. There were a few teams that just kind of always were bad. Over the last year and change, we've added several that are just nobody really has any clue what they're doing. New Orleans comes to mind. Chicago always near the bottom. I think Nico Harrison has put himself on that list by virtue of one single move. Phoenix has kind of pushed themselves there. So now what we kind of have are 5 teams that are really clearly at the bottom to me. Another 4 or 5 that are like a little iffy, a little questionable. But then the 20 on top of them, you kind of start it good and then you only go up from there. Where obviously results are going to vary. Only one team can win the championship every year. Only so many teams can win 50 games or make the playoffs or blah, blah, blah. But like I look at the teams in that like 20, 19, 18 range, and I see teams that are broadly doing the right things. They're either early in their trajectory or, they've had some bad luck in the lottery. They haven't had that one big break that it takes to really rise up these rankings. but I broadly understand the things that they're doing. And that's kind of where we're at in the NBA right now, where there are 5 or so teams that I have no clue what the Bulls are doing. I don't know what the Kings are doing. I don't know what the Pelicans are doing. They just don't seem to have a plan outright that we can judge. But everybody else, I think the bare minimum for me to consider you a good front office is you have a basic plan to, let's say, be a top 4 seed, right? I know we think in championship or bust terms, and for some specific teams, that's a valid way to look at, like, the way to judge them. But for most teams, if you can get to 50-ish wins, be a top 4 seed, get there first, and then we'll talk about the next steps from there. If you're on the path to doing that, I generally feel pretty good about your front office. And there are a lot more teams like that now than there used to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that's a great rubric. I could have a 3-hour conversation with you about this list. It's so interesting to me. Maybe one day we'll have the opportunity to do that. This is nominally a Knicks podcast. So let's go through the top 10 and we'll get to the Knicks. But I just kind of wanted to go through each team and sort of gauge if I agree. If they should be ahead of the Knicks, and then we could maybe debate it if I don't. But I mostly did agree with you. I think the top 2 we can do very quickly. Thunder, Celtics. I think that would be pretty no brainer. My top 2. You could make a case to me for like the Rockets cracking in there. I just think they've done such an incredible job. But Oklahoma City, clear cut number 1. Boston. I think Brad Stevens in just a couple of years put together as complete of a contender as I've seen in recent NBA history, I guess outside of the Kevin Durant Warriors in the last decade. That was just a perfectly built basketball team with like a shocking amount of depth given how much top line money they were paying to their stars. Maybe people question what they did this offseason. It seemed like just given the reality of the second apron, they had to pivot. They saw that, even though it was painful, buoyed by the Jason Tatum injury, they decided to do that. I find it a little hard to knock them too much for that. I'm curious where they go from here, but I say all that to say I have no real issue with the Thunder and Celtics being 1 and 2, and I'm sure that was pretty quick for you in your process.
Yeah, I mean, last 2 champions, Presti hasn't really made a big mistake since
the big mistake.
Like the one, the Celtic. The only interesting thing about Boston is Brad Stevens did inherit his 2 All-Stars, so that there is something to that like. He was building from such a strong foundation, but he's also basically gotten every move since then, right? There was not really much of a thought for any other team in those years. I think I think the Knicks probably would have beaten Boston even if Tatum hadn't gotten hurt. But I also feel like if you play that series out 100 times, Boston wins a lot more of them than New York. I think those were the 2 best teams last year. They were the 2 best teams the year before, or very much in that range, right? Yeah. So no, I didn't really give much thought to anybody else for the top 2. 3 is where things started to get a little bit interesting and where people started to disagree with me a little bit.
Yeah, three is where I'd push back. So I'll skip ahead and give, for people who don't have the article up, the full list up to the Knicks. The Spurs are 3 for you. The Rockets are 4. Cavs are 5. Knicks are 6. As I mentioned before, no issue with the Rockets being ahead of the Knicks. They've just done such an exceptional job. Like, 1, having win now talent, 2, like insulating that with a whole lot of draft equity going forward. Amen Thompson was just a fantastic, like, I don't want to like overhype it because that is about where most people had him going in mock drafts, but that is also the kind of pick that can get you fired if you get it wrong, right? Just taking this athletic freak and like a guy who came through a path in OTE that we haven't seen a lot of prospects come through and succeed at that point. Like, there was a world where that just went really wrong, and he hasn't done it yet, but it's someone who looks like he's on a star trajectory. Getting Kevin Durant, you highlight it really well in the article, like just consistently getting really good players on deals well below their market value, as deep as any team in the NBA next year. Like, I just think that is a really good roster that is built to compete next season and feels like for the next 15 years, even if their best player is obviously Kevin Durant, and he's 37 years old. And there will be questions once he moves on who that team is built around. The Spurs, even more so than the Cavs, are the one I have questions about. And I'm curious, you highlight in the article that a lot of their success is built on lottery luck and winning the Victor Wembanyama lottery. And to me, that is where I'm reticent to put them like as high as 3. And maybe to me, they'd be borderline top 10 because they're the number one building block there, again, is something that was entirely out of their control. And it's still early. And like you, I give them credit for not rushing, like trying to microwave a contender at him immediately. I don't think they've done a particularly good job building a team suited to his strengths. And granted, like this is the first year they're really actively trying to do that. So we have to give them time to do it. And maybe that's me being a little bit lower on De'Aaron Fox than consensus. I just don't like the idea of three guards. Fox should bounce back from a shooting perspective coming off the wrist injury. But like, I don't think they've put as much shooting as I would be inclined to put around Victor Wembanyama. I think some of the skill sets of the tertiary guys on that team are kind of duplicative. And I don't know. I don't really see a team that, barring Wemby just turning into like a top 15 player in NBA history, which could happen as soon as this year, I don't really see a team that's built to win titles. So even though they've done a great job accumulating assets, they have such a great piece in Wembanyama. 3 was a little rich for me, but like what about the Spurs pushed them ahead of the Cavs and Knicks for you? But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone lets me manage business calls and texts from just one app. The shared inbox feature is an absolute game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And their AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never, ever miss a customer. Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have an existing number with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers.
Okay, so there are a couple of things that I think we need to hit on here. The first is, if it was another team that had put this roster together and kind of made this sequence of moves, they might not have been number 3. If it had been Sacramento or Phoenix or whatever, I might have been a little bit more hesitant, had them a little bit lower. Track record does matter. Greg Popovich is still in the building. R.C. Buford is still in the building. You know, the current administration, like there are people there that weren't there during the dynasty, but the people who did build the dynasty and ownership as well is still in place here, right? I'm not saying drafting Manu Ginobili in 1999 or whenever they did that is all that applicable to what you're building now. But broadly speaking, I think it's fair to give GMs credit when they've built winners in the past, as the Spurs have, which is part of why Utah has ranked so high for me. Danny Ainge obviously did a wonderful job building the Celtics, won a championship, built the foundation for the next champion after he left. And, you know, now he's running a similar plan in Utah. It hasn't borne fruit yet, but I can broadly say I trust Danny Ainge to build an NBA team because he's done it several times. So there is some of that with the Spurs. But then on top of that, yes, I think the defining element of what has built this version of the Spurs has been lottery luck, right? 3 years in a row. Wembanyama they jumped up for, Castle they jumped up for, and I think they jumped up for Castle. I have to check. And then Harper they did jump up for the more than either of the other 2 picks as well. If they do build a champion or a multi-time champion or a dynasty or whatever, lottery luck, as it was with Tim Duncan, is going to be the single biggest factor. That's just the reality. There is nothing more important than getting your stars, and they might have gotten their stars because of the lottery. That being said, they've gotten most everything else around those guys right. They've gotten the smaller moves right. Something they've done that I really love is, you mentioned at the beginning the idea of targeting a couple of patsies. Well, what did the Spurs do over the last year? On 2 separate occasions, they made a 3-team blockbuster trade with the Bulls and the Kings, 2 of the worst teams in the NBA, and I think they heisted both of those deals. I think they got De'Aaron Fox for far less than he was worth, and I think getting that unprotected King swap in 31 was a great asset that's going to be very, very valuable for them down the line, even if the Kings are good by 2031. The thing about draft assets is, especially when they're far out, perception becomes reality. So, like, say you get to 2028 and the Kings are still a mess, the Spurs could trade that Kings swap as a very valuable piece in a blockbuster trade. They've done such a good job of buffering themselves against the second apron by adding all of these swaps, all of these deep future first round picks as ways to add cheap talent when you presume Victor Wembanyama is going to be one of the best players in the league. They also deserve credit, frankly, for tanking at the right time and knowing now is the time. We don't have a good enough team. Let's trade Derek White. Let's trade DeJounte Murray. Let's go in the tank. Obviously, most teams don't get a Victor Wembanyama in their first spin on the lottery wheel, but they made the right decision to get there. And then you look at some of the smaller moves, right? I thought the Luke Cornett contract was great, only guaranteed for 2 years. Sign me up. One of the best permanent backups in the NBA. I look at every move they've made that has been within their control, and I really like it. So if you want to say over the last couple of years, maybe the Knicks have nudged the Spurs a little bit, have been a little bit better, I'm open to the argument. But when you factor in the overall track record of the organization, I gave Spurs deference.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and they've proven it, right? Like Leon Rose had no track record before coming to the Knicks. A lot of guys in this front office did not have an NBA track record to speak of. I just think over the last 5 years since Leon's took over, they've been a little bit better. You look at stuff like the Isaiah Hartenstein signing, and obviously the Knicks weren't. I mean, it worked out a little too well, right? With Oklahoma City ending up with him, Jalen Brunson, like. Has there been a better, I might be forgetting one. Has there been a better free agency signing in the last 5 years in the NBA?
Than Brunson? No. I mean, when you factor in the value to get, when you get max level production for a non-max salary, that's really rare on the free agent market. When it happens, I usually think back to like Stephen Curry when he had the injuries early in his career and his first contract was below market, because we didn't quite know what he was going to be yet, but that was internal. When a guy reaches unrestricted free agency, that's their own team saying, we don't see it. I can't think of many NBA free agents in history that have signed a submax contract, like a substantially submax contract, and then played at a max level. That's like, if you're going to make the list of the best free agent signings of all time, it's below the superstar absolute max guys, right? It's below LeBron in 2014 and 2010. It's below Shaq in 96. Those kind of signings, fine. But the next level down, one of the best free agent signings of all time.
All right, guys, when we come back, we're going to wrap things up with Sam, why Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns are going to be the two players that ultimately define whether this Knicks team wins a championship and whether or not Leon Rose in this front office was successful. We'll get into that in just a sec. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. What I love about FanDuel is it adds a little bit of spice to my Sundays. I'm a New York Giants fan, and that has mostly been an exciting game against the Cowboys last week aside, a depressing experience, right? No offensive line. No quarterback, just no spark. And if I want a little more juice on Sundays, yes, fantasy football is fine, but FanDuel is what really gets my blood pumping. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Yeah, I think he's in that mix. And it's so funny, and it's what makes these rankings tricky, right? Like you could say, on some level, that's just as much luck as the Victor Wembanyama thing is, right? Because the Knicks, one had the connections to bring him in. They leveraged those connections, much to the chagrin of the rest of the NBA, to the fullest extent. Maybe a little nepotism there, bringing in Rick Brunson. But I think even more so than that, it would be fair to say when the Knicks signed him to that contract, they maybe expected a guy who was going to be like an efficient 22 to 24 point per game scorer and like a top 40 player in the NBA, not a top 10 player in the NBA. And maybe that's luck that he ended up being a top 10 player in the NBA. And do you say, well, Leon Rose is a genius for recognizing that? Or did he just see a guy who was fresh off, like dominating a playoff series and said, you know what, this is good value. Like, I think that's undeniably a good move from the Knicks. Does it show that Leon Rose is a genius that like had a vision that no one else in the NBA? Maybe, maybe not. Like we can't know that from outside. And it's what makes these rankings so tricky. When I advocate for the Knicks to be a little bit higher and like, again, I've said it, like, I think I would have them at 4, and I think them in Cleveland is a toss-up. So I had a bigger issue when they were behind the Jazz. I don't have a huge issue with this ranking, but I look at how they drafted. I look at the OG Anunoby trade. I think the Cat trade is a TBD. The Mikal Bridges trade can be, at this moment certainly viewed as a negative, and that was a big one, right? They gave up the next 5 years of their NBA draft, or at least control of the next 5 to 7 years of their NBA draft with that one. So we can debate that. I just think what they've done on the margins with Brock Aller, and obviously as someone who covers this team, like I'm a little bit more in it every single day and looking at that, but I'm sure in New York, Sam, you are too. I mean, just the way he's gotten the money to work over and over again and moves that compound, like early in his tenure, like stealing a couple second round picks here, stealing a few there, and that just like leading into better and better players. It is kind of reminiscent of what Sam Presti has done over and over again, right? Which is like taking an acorn and somehow turning into a gold coin just by like bartering and trading and constantly finding a way to just slightly upgrade value. And I don't know if the Knicks get the recognition around the NBA for doing that as well as they have. But I'll let you comment on that. And I'm curious, like how close it was between them and the Cleveland Cavaliers for you, because for me, those two teams, like in real life, are very neck and neck in terms of how I project them, in terms of how they're built. They're very neck and neck.
Yeah, why don't we start with Cleveland? I think it's interesting because, I mean, you brought up the fact that, there was a little bit of luck in Jalen Brunson being as good as he was. And you do kind of wonder, what if it had been Colin Sexton's dad, who was Leon Rose's first client or something like that, where what if it was a different person, or like what if Brunson wasn't as good? They tried to trade for Donovan Mitchell. There was a whole summer about it. We were all pretty convinced it was happening. I mean, it seems clear to me, frankly, that the Knicks didn't even know Jalen Brunson was that good, because if they did, they probably would have paid him even more. They wouldn't have tried to trade for Donovan Mitchell, but it did work out. My position with Cleveland, it's a few things. They have consistently found like star or very slightly sub-star level players for value that nobody saw and in places that nobody saw. So here's what I mean. They had no business stealing Jared Allen in the James Harden trade, right? I don't know how Houston didn't end up with Jared Allen in that deal, frankly. Like, for them to swoop in with, I think, what was the 30th or 29th pick, something like that, to get Jared Allen, that's incredible. We've forgotten this because he's not on the team anymore, but they did the same thing with Lauri Markkanen, right?
Yeah.
Lauri Markkanen didn't break out until he left Cleveland, but Cleveland clearly saw what Utah ultimately saw, and he did grow into an all-star. The Cavs just very, very consistently find talent in places that other teams aren't looking. Ty Jerome is a great example. And then I look at the Donovan Mitchell trade. Even like the Knicks were in the running for Mitchell as well, but they would have been trading for him under very, very different circumstances, right? He wanted to go to the Knicks. The Knicks are the big market team. They have that advantage. He would have been a guaranteed re-sign. That wasn't the case for Cleveland, and nobody was really talking about Cleveland until they actually got him. They took a risk. We spent 2 years thinking he's going to leave, he's going to leave, he's going to leave. They convinced him to stay, and they built this 64-win monster. I think the degree of difficulty, given the market in Cleveland, is just higher than it was in New York. Now, that being said, what you could argue on the Knicks side is the Knicks never really tanked. The 1 year they kind of tanked with this regime, and I guess, was Leon even on the job yet when they tanked?
Yeah, are you thinking 2021, 22 is what you're thinking of?
I'm thinking the year they drafted Obi. That was like the one really high lottery pick that this administration had. They didn't get a Mobley and a Garland through the lottery, so there is something to that. And I think that leads me to the Knicks. I think, you mentioned all of the ways that you don't think the Knicks get enough credit. Let's talk about like some of the nerdy minutia stuff that they do so much better than other teams. I think a big one is the way they structure their contracts. They're consistently starting out high and then descending, which does a few things for you, right? Number one, it helps insulate you against the rising cap, against the rising tax, et cetera, helps keep you below the aprons, makes contracts a little bit more tradable. Like I think we saw they put team options on every contract. So that factored in with Evan Fournier, it factored in with a couple other guys. They are one of the best teams as far as structuring their contracts in financially advantageous ways, which is more important now than ever. Getting Jalen Brunson to re-sign on that cheaper deal that's one of the best contracts in the NBA. Off the top of my head, it might be the best.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go look. They manage their money as well as almost any team. They also draft very, very well in positions where you wouldn't expect them to, right? They have OG Anunoby right now because they took Emmanuel quickly in the 20s.
Yep.
If you don't land a 6-man of the year candidate / somebody Toronto could look at feasibly as their point guard of the future, you don't have OG Anunoby right now. That's just a credit to their drafting. Deuce McBride, who I think we'll talk about a little bit more, great find, and they got him, unsurprisingly, on a great contract. They get all of the little things right. My question for the Knicks, and this is not a question I have quite to the same extent with the Cavs, did they get the stars right? It's kind of that simple. If they win the championship this year, they might be number 3 on next July's rankings. It's also possible that you look at the Mikal Bridges trade 2-3 years down the line and say this is the reason they didn't win a championship. I think there's a world where they don't make the Mikal Bridges trade. They still have all their picks, and they trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo this summer or next summer, right? It seems like if he does eventually move, market is going to be a consideration for him. So that is my big question. Did they get it right with the stars? The regular season last year with Bridges was a mixed bag. The playoffs, I mean, the Celtics series was great. The Pacers series for both Cat and for Bridges, very up and down. Mm-hmm. So I'm not making any final judgments, any firm judgments right now, but the jury's still out on the star selection. They made their bed with those guys. We're going to see how well they sleep in it over the next couple of years.
I think that is absolutely fair. I have all the same questions. They keep me up at night, Sam. The bed analogy was a good one because I'm tossing and turning, thinking about that, and then thinking about Mikal and Kat struggling to guard and Andrew Naismith, Pascal Siakam picking pops and picking rolls. It wasn't good at times. And I have all those same questions that you do. I do have some of those questions for the Cavs as well, but I think that is a very reasonable argument and a fair way to conclude our conversation on the front offices. All right, guys, we'll be back with Sam in just a sec to do a deeper dive on his GM rankings. I promise we're going to get into some Knicks specific talk, debating them against the Cleveland Cavaliers and them against the San Antonio Spurs. Why the Knicks probably have a better front office than both of them. We'll get into it in just a sec. All right, guys, that is it for today's episode with Sam. If it feels like we're cutting it off a little short, that is because we ended up going really long with him talking about the New York Knicks, what their starting lineup could look like, and what tier of title contender the Knicks are. Really fun conversation, and that is going to be for Monday. Until then, be good. Enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you soon. You're on Locked On Knicks.